Rather than a lecture, I just thought to share some important impressions or feelings about the whole project. So I've just sort of titled this Peranakans, Pictures and Partnerships, the collaborative journey of the Peranakan Museum's exhibition and this new book, and the global story it tells. There's three main topics that I'd like to sort of just touch upon. The idea of collections. I think this whole project emerged as a response to kind of the existing kinds of collections and trying to add a new dimension to this. So yeah, just sort of looking at 19th century photographs in public institutions and the sort of development of private collections and how that sort of is helping to change the way we see photography. And so this idea of a private collection has resulted in this exhibition, Amek Gambar. So this new kind of source is creating new paradigms and engendering new scholarship, which has resulted in the book. Lastly, I'd just like to sum it all up with the idea of how photography, although we might see it as a way to kind of underline or emphasize the idea of identity, I find the more you discover and the more you rummage in junk shops on eBay and in people's drawers, you find things rather that sort of upturn that very idea. Yet what we see, at the end of the day, is material that, as diverse as it may be, but yet it's still such a human story that ultimately, you cannot help but feel connected to this material, wherever you come from. These are the three areas I'd like to talk about. Starting with the first one, and to sort of pay tribute to the antecedents. The 19th century photography as a subject kind of emerged, I suppose, after the war. And if I might cite, I might have missed something here, so fellow contributors, do excuse and do tell me if I missed out anything important. But I believe, the Rob Neuenhuis's 1961 Tempo Dulu was one of the first books to come out on Southeast Asia that looked at photography. I think a lot of it was based on institutional collections at that time. He followed up in 1998 with a 3-volume version of it. He wrote under the pseudonym of E. Breton Denys in 1961, and the 3 volumes came out in 98. The other big pioneer in this, important pioneer in this, of course, is Clark Werzik, who is a dear friend. We email each other rather often. And he saw the importance of 19th century photography, and he's written several memoirs or accounts of this, and how there was not much interest in the 60s in all in the institutions, but he did come up with 3 important books on India, Japan, and China in 76, 79, and 80, uncovering, photos in storerooms. So these all emerged from institutions, were donated either by people who lived in the East, diplomats, travelers, and families who might have spent time in Southeast Asia or in Asia and who had returned to Europe and America. So these histories were written based on the kind of materials that were available or had ended up in institutions at that time. They were sort of really eye-opening and sort of set the path for, which has ended up today with Amek Gambar. In the Singapore context, of course, we have 1987's, we have John Falconer's A Vision of the Past in 1987 about the work of the G.R. Lambert Studio. And then 1995, of course, Gretchen Liu is one of the Singapore pioneers in the study of photography, and she worked on the Lee Brothers studio from the family album, and of course the wonderful Pictorial History of Singapore in 2007. In 1988, Gretchen was also the editor of my Uncle Kipling's book, The Singapore House. He was very much my mentor and inspiration. He, in the sense of, he was a collector and a researcher, and the combination of both has, the way he combined this sort of collecting and writing was a very big inspiration for me. And of course, 2010, we had Jason Toe's 19th century photographs of Singapore. Come 2014, we have Gael Newton's, now I have to get this title right, it's Garden of the East, Photography in Indonesia. I think for the first time, we had a book that not only looked at institutional collections, but private collections. And the idea of talking about photos that had belonged to Indonesians, not just the legacy of collections of things that had belonged to Europeans who had traveled to Asia. So I feel this was an important sort of new direction, and Dr. Susie Protschky also contributed an essay which looked at this sort of material, and that was really setting off for me a very exciting new angle to this sort of study. And I also think 2016's History of Photo Studios in China by Tong Pingxue is also a very important contribution. He is also a collector and assembled this amazing lot of mostly studio photographs that he sourced primarily in China. And I think that's quite an important difference. It's a book written about photographs that belong to Chinese families, and anyway, it emerged on the secondary and antique markets in China. And Amek Gambar and the photograph collection that was donated to the Peranakan Museum has very much this kind of origin. I started collecting photographs in about 1990, and the sources were, antique markets, flea markets, eBay, of course, a whole range of antique dealers and junk shops in Singapore. So the sources came from East and West in a kind of mishmash, which sort of also presented a completely, when you put all the material together, it sort of created a very different feeling about photography just by this different kind of grouping of material. Of course, there were also other important collectors who wrote photography books, such as Terry Bennett, who has written rather important studies on Vietnamese and Chinese photography, as well as Scott Merrilees, who has come out with several very important books on photography in Indonesia. So then we end up with Amek Gambar, which in a way comes after all these, on the trail of all these important works and studies. And what I'd like to propose, I mean, it's a joke, but it's not really a joke. But to propose the idea of photography as Peranakan. Photography is something that is hybrid, varied, and unstable, throwing together inputs from subjects, cameramen, camera technology, the instant moment, the candid, the contrived, the manipulated. Photography means so many things, and I think if we think of all its various dimensions, it's so mixed up that it cannot be anything but Peranakan. It disrupts and invents and gives birth to something hybrid every time a photograph is taken. Every moment we take a picture, it's it's a combination of so many things that, you know, it cannot be anything but hybrid. So rather than asserting something that photography is something fixed and traditional, asserting something that is fixed and traditional, I think it is complicit in the ongoing invention, experimenting and restaging the self in front of the camera. And we see that ongoing with the iPhone and selfies and Wi-Fi's, and how that's changing the way people pose, etc. The outcome of the exhibition and the book is what I call the Peranakan collage, as something integrative, interdisciplinary. It is what I call the rojak approach. The rojak, for some of you who might not know, is a famous salad in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, which is you know, diverse things all thrown together in a most delicious medley of flavors. This rojak is the unique cultural feature of port cities. It is a unique feature of Singapore. And it's something that is celebrated at the Peranakan Museum and the Asian Civilisations Museum. This collage is also about transnational networks and has resulted today in this meeting of people and contributors from Europe, spanning Europe, Southeast Asia, and Australia. I love the way we see things that are diverse, yet the same, and the same meaning that you know, the effect, the viral effect of popular culture, people wanting the same thing, or studio photographs from everywhere in the world having sort of the same props. We see this sameness yet diversity, and this is such an interesting combination as well. And finally, just a little point about what the historian John Tagg said about photography as having no unity, but rather as something flickering across a field of institutional spaces. Anyway, this is sort of an excuse for the book being kind of a messy mix-up of a lot of different themes and topics, all just thrown in together. I'd just like to also introduce the various contributors. Dominic Lowe, as I mentioned, who is the assistant curator for the Peranakan Museum. He has written a piece on the Securing the Shadow, looking back at the Peranakan Museum's collection of photographs. And I thought it was beautifully summed up. And actually, I'm not, you know, the collection, the name, my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lee Kip Lee, cannot claim to be the first donation. You know, there have been several very wonderful donations given before and during and after, and it's still ongoing, including these amazing photographs from the Tan Kim Tien family from the estate of Tan Cheng Siang. Wonderful portraits, very large ancestral portraits were given, and you know, it's a lovely introduction to what the collection comprises. Dominic, I love how the ACM curators are kind of like go across disciplines, and he's worked on Joseon Korea, an exhibition on Joseon Korea, and he's worked on a curator for Amek Gambar, and his next project is the upcoming Indian fashion exhibition at the Asian Civilisations Museum. And you know, rojak is often used in a kind of derogatory way, but I think at ACM it's wonderful that we can celebrate how curators work on very different things, and I'm very excited about the outcome. We have Mr. Gilles Massour's contribution on Jules Itier. And what is so fascinating, this daguerreotype by Jules Itier of Bautze has been in the National Collection since 2005, I believe. But this essay that he's contributed is the first time something is written about Jules Itier in Singapore for Singapore publication, and that is just so exciting. Gilles is a multidisciplinary artist and scholar who arrived in Singapore in 1981. At that time, he met my brother in the sort of art and fashion world and photography, my brother Dick. He graduated in photography from the University of Provence and very quickly became part of the Singapore art scene as a photojournalist and travel photographer. He has had several exhibitions over the years, including a show of his selected works at NUS Museum recently from 2019 to August this year. He has a remarkable Kopitiam God installation at Kota Culture at the moment and on Wall Street. Do visit it. He joined La Salle College of the Arts in 2000 and taught photography, which led him to the work of a fellow Provençal photographer, Jules Itier. What's amazing, the daguerreotype, and there's several more of Singapore, are not only the earliest images of Singapore, but also of Asia from 1844. Thank you very much for this. Then we have Dr. Joachim Karl Bautze's contribution on Fedor Jagor. Dr. Bautze is an academic specializing not only in the arts of Central, South, and Southeast Asia, but also in the history of 19th century photography in Asia. He received his doctorate in Indian art history in 1982 from the Free University of Berlin, and was for 10 years the head of department and professor of the South Asia Institute of the University. And from 2002 to 2005, he was professor of Indian art history at Wako University in Tokyo, among many other prestigious appointments. He has published essays on a wide range of art historical themes, including early Indian terracottas in 1995, Gods, Kings and Tigers, the Art of Kota in 1997, and most recently, the Unseen Siam Early Photography in 2016. And that's how I got to know of Dr. Bautze. He wrote about Fedor Jagor's photographs in Siam, and there he mentioned that Jagor was in Singapore in 1857. And what we have in the book is this essay, the first study about Fedor Jagor's photographs in Singapore and Malacca. And he has unearthed with great difficulty Jagor's collection in the Stadtlichen Museen zu Berlin, where there are several very important photographs by Jagor from this period, 1857-58, such as this picture of the Rocho River, as well as a donation given by my family of a wealthy Chinese businessman, which you think might be the Baba Tan Kim Ching, the grandson of Tan Tok Seng. A stereo view printed slightly later, but photographed sometime between 1857 and 58. So these would be the earliest paper photographs of Singapore, and Dr. Bautze's work is so important. None of this has ever been published before. Then we have Gael's work. Gael Newton is an art historian and curator who has focused on photography over the last 46 years. First at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and from 85 to 2014, she was senior curator of Australian and international photography at the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra, where she put together a large survey collection of Asia-Pacific photography, acquiring several important private collections, including one of 4,000 colonial-era Indonesian photographs from the gallery, leading to two major exhibitions, 2008's Picture Paradise, Asia-Pacific Photography, and Garden of the East Photography in Indonesia in 2014. Gael has contributed to Southeast Asia national surveys, essays to the Southeast Asia, to the Routledge 07 Encyclopedia of 19th Century Photography. Since leaving the NGA, she has been involved in many research projects, including the career of pioneer British photographer John Thompson in Southeast Asia. John Thompson's work in China and in Britain is well known, but he first started his career in Singapore, and I think Gael's essay is also very important in sort of throwing a spotlight on his early work and his sort of first job, really, as a photographer here in Singapore when he arrived in 1862-63. Then we have Sebastian Dobson's work on August Sackler, An Overall Picture of Life in Further India. Again, this nothing has ever been published in Singapore about another pioneering photographer. And we're talking about people who arrived before Lambert. And Sackler arrived probably around, August Sackler arrived around 1863. Sebastian Dobson is an independent scholar of the history of early photography in East Asia, especially Japan and Southeast Asia. He lectures widely in Europe, the United States, Australia, and Japan, and his publications include encyclopedia entries, book reviews, numerous articles, and catalog essays for exhibitions hosted in Boston, in Singapore, and Tokyo. His books include Art and Artifice, Japanese Photographs of the Meiji Era in 2004, and Under Eagle Eyes, Lithographs, Drawings, and Photographs from the Prussian Expedition to Japan, 1860-61, which was published 9 years ago. In fact, that's how we connected over Sackler, because August Sackler turns out to have come to Singapore as part of the Prussian expedition to Japan. So, in fact, he apparently took photographs, ended up taking photographs of Japan and before becoming a, and then returning back to Singapore in 1863, I think, to open up a photo studio. So it's interesting how Sebastian's work on early Japanese photography led him to write and research about August Sackler's career in Singapore. Then we have Dr. Bautze's work on G.R. Lambert. I have to tell you, Dr. Bautze has an encyclopedia in his head, and it is awe-inspiring to just have a conversation with him, and he could be telling you about the sort of something really fascinating and obscure about Indian painting, on sculpture or Pagan murals, as much as you know, every little detail about the life of several photographers, not only those who in Singapore but also in Thailand. So Dr. Bautze had also worked on Lambert's career in Thailand. He also had a studio there, and has found out an incredible amount of information about his life and work. And many of what, a lot of what he's discovered was not known by John Falconer back in the 80s, back in '87. So there's a lot of new information in this book, and it's so exciting to see this published in Amek Gambar. Thank you, Joachim. Then, of course, I have an essay, which I think I won't really get into it. I'm just showing this, showing you this a picture, and it sort of sums up what I feel about Peranakans and photography. At the end of the day, as I said, these things that are coming out of people's drawers and being sold on eBay, pictures that kind of turn your idea about identity upside down. And basically, we have yet to discover pictures that might defy what anyone imagines is Peranakan. And again, what I love about this picture is you can see that she's Peranakan by the hairpins stuck above her head, protruding above her head. That's a typical Nonya kind of chignon. But she's not really trying to be anything. She's just obviously a lady who is intimately and very comfortable, intimately connected to the photographer, very comfortable with him, and she's just standing there. She is just a naked woman. She's not trying to be a Peranakan. The photographer at the same time is also not trying to portray her exotic oriental. You can see from the background, it's just this kind of some kind of laboratory or a workshop, and it's just got things thrown in the background. And I love this sort of snapshot. It captures something, a kind of very familiar moment, and kind of a non-exotic image, if you ask me. And I think that sort of sums up what I'm trying to say about photography in various ways. Please read the essay. Also, we have Liesbeth Ouwehand's contribution on Chinese photographers and elite networks in the Dutch East Indies. Again, this is sort of a new contribution. For the first time, someone is looking at what Chinese photo studios were doing in the Dutch East Indies. Liesbeth is the curator of photography at the Research Center for Material Culture in Leiden. This is sort of like the new joint sort of setup in the Netherlands, combining the Tropen Museum, the Ethnographic Museum in Leiden, etc. She was formerly the curator of South and Southeast Asian photography in the Leiden University Library, responsible for the photo collections of the Kern Institute, as well as the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asia, Asian and Caribbean Studies, better known as the KITLV. For the last 11 years, Liesbeth has had several papers published on the collection of Indonesian photographs in the KITLV collection, such as photographic representations of the performing Indonesian in 2013 and Chinese photographers and their clientele in the Netherlands, East Indies in 2017. And I'm really excited to have a paper connected to this 2017 paper for our Amek Gambar catalogue. Then we have Dr. Susie Protschky's Chinese Indonesians and the Dutch Monarchy. Dr. Protschky is a senior lecturer in modern history at Monash University, Australia, with a particular interest in the history of colonialism and decolonization in Southeast Asia. She works on environmental disaster and conflict in the 19th and 20th centuries, focusing on the role of photography in expressing atrocity, humanitarianism, witnessing citizenship and agency in this context. Her latest book, Photographic Subjects, Monarchy and Visual Culture in Colonial Indonesia, won the Asian Studies Association of Australia Book Prize and the Royal Studies Journal Book Prize in 2019. Her first book, Images of the Tropics, Environment and Visual Culture in Colonial Indonesia, was published by KLTLV Press in 2011. She's also the editor of Photography, Modernity and the Governed in Late Colonial Indonesia, 2015, and Modern Times in Southeast Asia, 2018. And we have this wonderful contribution about these presentation albums from Chinese associations to Queen Wilhelmina, including this beautifully carved presentation album in a beautiful box, beautifully bound album in a wonderful presentation box, presented by the Tianghua Huiquan Chinese Association to Queen Wilhelmina in 1909, with this wonderful batik silk, I think, binding. And again, it's a new topic and information that's never been published, and material that's been lurking in the Royal Collection of the Netherlands for a very long time. And it's wonderful that this is part of the book too. Thank you, Dr. Protschky. And finally, we have Casey Hammond's Social and Historical Aspects of Peranakan Portraits. Casey Hammond has a particular interest in people whose lives cross various boundaries, such as those of migrant workers moving between Indonesia and Taiwan. He was senior lecturer at the Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences faculty of the Singapore University of Technology and Design, SUTD. He's also an avid collector of 19th and 20th century photographs of Indonesia. And that's actually how we met. We were introduced by a dealer whom I met on eBay of Indonesian photographs. And he has put together sort of his insight after studying all these photos in his collection of studio photographs and snapshots from Indonesia. And again, a different perspective on material that came, that belong to Indonesian Peranakan families and that have come out on the market. So thank you, Casey. So altogether, this book is a Peranakan collage, I would say a rojak of Itier, Yagor, Babatan Kimching, Thompson, Sackler, Lambert, the Lee brothers, Queen Wilhelmina, Kodak, weddings, funerals, and naked nonias. I just like to make a final point about the book and how it draws together all these elements, and ultimately how perhaps, you know, photography, the history of photography should be seen as one sort of subject across the world, rather than as something split up into geographically into segmented, nationally segmented histories. I love how we see kind of this, you know, this sense of wonder that Munshi Abdullah expressed when he first encountered a daguerreotype in 1841. You know, we have to understand that when it first emerged anywhere in the world, it was a wonder. Quite often, photography in Asia is sort of framed within this sense of wonder and magic, that how these superstitious people encountered photography. But we have to remember that wherever it appeared, whether in America or in Europe, the initial response was the same. You cannot have but have felt this sense of wonder, and at times also suspicion. And this suspicion also was across all boundaries, as we can see by this report in a German newspaper in 1839, where the writer said that wanting to fix fleeting reflections is not merely an impossible quest, as thorough German investigations have established, but the very, very wish to do so is blasphemous. So basically, you had people who feared it and loved it everywhere. And quite often we see this caricature of photography's reception in Asia and in Africa as kind of like this sort of kind of fear of magic and the devil, as a stereotype that we should sort of do away with, and see that you cannot but have had a very human response. And also in my essay, I touch upon how, in fact, photography, some people took to it immediately, and some were very suspicious. It was the same everywhere. I think what I particularly love about what I come to see in a lot of the images is the problem or idea of seeing pictures right from the early days of Asians not doing anything particularly Asian. And this is one example which I've spoken about, and also this one of my favorite family photographs. It shows two granduncles just having a meal at a period when any picture of in 1900, when any picture of a Chinaman is discussed purely in the context of Chinese identity. Here you can see, though, the kind of diversity even in the way they eat. So my granduncle Chimtek on the left is using a spoon. My granduncle Chim Tuan on the right or at center using his hands. And I also love how they've styled their cues in a very different way. My uncle Chimtek on the left has chosen to shave his head right up to his back, so that only a little circle leaving only a little circle at the back. So it sort of creates a much more shaved head look. While my granduncle Chim Tuan has kept his hair a little bit fuller with a wider circle, and he's tied his queue kind of across his head. Interestingly, also, they're dressed in different ways. One in a drill cotton closed coat, Western style, and my granduncle in a, jersey t-shirt, and it's just such a mishmash of preferences, and they look as natural eating as we do today, and we often forget when we try and pigeonhole identity on the subject of portraits, that they're just like you and me. Actually, we forget that. I love how also photography is so playful, and Peranakans especially, we can see from the earliest days how cosplay and dressing up has always been so integral to Peranakan identity. We've just been trying on different clothes, and the whole playfulness of it, experimental side of it, is often sort of overlooked. I think this sort of material also reclaims for the subject the share credit for creating the photograph. It's often very much put in the hands of the photographer. It also rehabilitates the spontaneous and whimsical. It exposes the viral demand and consumption of assorted styles from all over the world. It demonstrates how undiscovered resources can reveal diverse and unexpected aspects of culture and society. It draws attention to the limitations of studies based only on Western collections of works of Asia by Western photographers made for Western consumption. It exemplifies photography's global history. Ultimately, they offer a tantalizing possibility that culture and social life must have been equally and exuberantly disordered before the era of photography. Photography invites us to speculate that we have never been traditional. No launch would be complete without some form of entertainment. And as this is not really possible on Zoom, I'm just throwing in right at the end, just for laughs, some moving images and some sound. And bear with me, here is an old movie of my parents' wedding, Mr. and Mrs. Lee Kip Lee, on the 27th of August, 1955. Far from being traditional, it was at a Roman Catholic church. My father in a suit, my mother in a lovely white wedding dress, looking very much like Grace Kelly's, but this is before, I believe. I particularly love this moment because here is everyone getting together for a group photograph. The old lady in the baju panjang is my grand aunt. And I love how you see, obviously even in the 50s, dress codes in Singapore were not strictly observed. Some in suits, some just in shirt and tie. You see ladies in cheongsam and Western attire, and the old aunts in kabayas, etc. Next up, I just wanted to show you this. Well, earlier on we had my granduncles eating, and I just thought to carry on with the theme of dining, and my grandmother having a mango, probably plucked from the tree. That's my pa having lunch. I have a suspicion that's Worcester sauce somehow. Oh, and I love this. This is my mother doing something everyone should be doing or trying anyway. The durian. And there's only one way to eat the durian, with your hands. Although I do it with a spoon. There you go. You don't have to wait. You can't waste even the bits on your fingertips. Finger licking good. You know, and I love this, you know, diamond ring and durian. I love this, and this is the old Ama who's getting the whiskey on, maybe for my grandfather. I love this moment. This is my grandmother in 1956. My great-grandmother had just passed away at 100. And here she is with her cigarette holder doing a Marlene Dietrich, I think. It's interesting to think she was in her 60s, about the same age as my brother Dick is now. And my mother is pregnant with my brother Dick, so this would be sometime before August 56. Talking about music and musical influences, you know, we've lived for a long time with popular music from America and England. My father tells me my grandfather's favorite tune was My Old Kentucky Home, written by Stephen Foster. And this is kind of an old Southern kind of pop song from the 19th century. And it's a song my father could sing, and he taught me how to sing it as well. And, you know, and we've grown up with pop music from the 19th century. And this is our tradition. And this is my father, really, and this is all the family getting into this.
I'm crazy for the love of you. It would be a stylish marriage. I cannot afford a carriage. But you look sweet upon the seat of a bicycle built for two.
Crazy Peranakans. And this is my father singing the theme song from Betty Grable's Springtime in the Rockies.
It's springtime in the Rockies. I'll be coming back to you. Little sweetheart of the mountain, with your bonny eyes so blue. Once again I say I love you. While the birds sing all the day, when it's springtime in the Rockies, far away. You remember this?
That's with his Raffles College classmate, Chong Lai Wah, who is still alive and kicking. She's doing rather well in her mid-90s, late 90s actually. You know, I just love this picture, which I had to throw in, a Peranakan Hawaiian band in Singapore in the 1930s. And, you know, I think I just want to sort of close with the idea that in so many respects, Peranakans, Singaporeans, we are so completely mixed up. And this is crazy. This is a news cutting from 1975 of my brother John, myself, and Andrew. As mentioned, we grew up singing my father's pop songs, Bing Crosby and Andrew Sisters, and we, you know, that was the music of our childhood, and we could do it so well. We started doing it in 3-part harmony, and my mother even encouraged us to get into dresses, and I don't know how it ended up in the papers. And you know, I have pretty crazy parents. I wouldn't even allow my kids to do this, but my parents were just so so fun-loving, and we had this incredible childhood. I'd like to close with a performance. My 3 brothers and I, Dick, John, Andrew, Lee, singing a song written in the 1930s that we grew up with. Please enjoy.
Heaven opens a magic lane, a magic lane. When the clouds darken up the skyway, there's a rainbow, a highway to be found, leading from your window pane to a place behind the sun, just a step beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I've heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, far behind. Where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops, that's where you find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, blue sky, birds fly over the rainbow. Why? Then why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that delightful talk. It makes me feel nostalgic already about our time working together on this exhibition. What a journey it has been, and thank you so much for your guidance and pearls of wisdom all the time. We just have one question, and it's from Ong Bao Xuan. And he has this question to you, Peter. He likes to ask, given that today, the modern equivalents of the photographs that we have seen are Instagram filters, Instagram photos, Facebook photos. What do you think this practice of collecting photography will evolve in the future?
Sorry, what do I think? What?
How do you think collecting photography will evolve in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because, you know, the physical photograph might be obsolete at the kind of extent we had seen in the past. So that might become increasingly rare. We might just go and print out digitally, you know, a selection of what we want. I mean, the old days you just print all this pictures and put them all in an album. So photograph production has completely changed, and also, of course, now everything is just digitally printed. So the actual photograph might really become obsolete. You know, as an image developed from a negative. Yeah, I think I know, for example, the National Library has really been looking at collections that are now all digital, and you know the implications of that, and I'm sure the nature of collecting will completely change, and also because you know, when things became just physical objects, you know, some of course were reproduced more than others, but now with digital images, the rarity aspect of photography has also, photographic images has also changed. I mean, there's a completely different thing, and you know, yeah, it might be very challenging, but of course, we know that photographers, commercial photographers and art photographers have really been controlling their output, and therefore ensuring that these images become kind of, as objects, precious as well. But you know, from the general public, the millions and gazillions of images being taken every day, that would be interesting. And actually, some of the contributors would have very interesting points about this, including Gilles Massot, who has been thinking about much, you know, all the more philosophical aspects of photography. And I mean, to be honest, sometimes I don't even understand what he's saying, but I've told him that.
Thank you so much, Peter. And on that note, and in the spirit of Amek Gambar, we shall conclude today's book launch.